everyone, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us here on Times Now. This is Times Now Live and I'm Hina Gambhir. Viewers, a month after the tragic Air India plane crash in Ahmedabad that claimed the lives of 260 people, a preliminary probe report has been released by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau. This is the first official account of what went wrong with the AI-171 flight seconds after takeoff from the Ahmedabad airport. As per the preliminary report, fuel cutoff switches of both engines transitioned from run to cutoff position, one after another, with a time gap of just 1 second. And this led to the snapping of fuel supply to both the engines, causing them to lose power. However, viewers, the report does not mention what caused the fuel switches to move. Was it due to human action, a mechanical failure, or some kind of an electronic malfunction? That critical question, viewers, remains unanswered and is the focus of the ongoing investigation. The preliminary report also contains a paraphrased account of the communication that took place inside the cockpit pertaining to the fuel cutoff. According to AAIB's prelim report, one of the pilots can be heard asking the other, "Why did he cut off?" He was referring to the fuel switch because there are two modes in a fuel switch, run and cut off. The other pilot responded that he did not do so. That's it. That is the only excerpt of the conversation between the pilots from the cockpit voice recorder AAIB has put in this report. Now, after the fuel supply was cut off, the pilots scrambled to save the aircraft. Within 10 to 14 seconds of the fuel cutoff, they moved both fuel switches back to the run position. They were trying to salvage the situation. Both engines began automatic restart sequences, with engine 1 showing signs of recovery and engine 2 attempting to relight. However, recovery could not be achieved due to insufficient time and altitude. And we have a reaction coming in from Civil Aviation Minister and MOS Civil Aviation. Listen in.
I don't think we should jump into any conclusions on this. I truly believe we have the most wonderful workforce in terms of pilots and the crew in the whole world. I have to appreciate all the efforts the pilots and the crew in this country are putting into the aviation. They are the backbone of this civil aviation. They are the primary resource of civil aviation, and we care for the welfare and the well-being of our pilots also. So let's not jump to any conclusions at this stage. Let us wait for the final report.
नहीं, अभी तो ये AAIB ने जो रिपोर्ट प्रस्तुत की है प्राथमिक रिपोर्ट है, तो अभी ऐसा कुछ भी निष्कर्ष ना निकाले हम, क्योंकि मेरी भी सबसे विनती यही रहेगी कि अभी तो ये प्राथमिक रिपोर्ट है, इसके बाद भी जांच जारी रहेगी। अभी उसके बहुत सारी चीजें आगे आएगी। एक जो सामने आया उसमें से कुछ निष्कर्ष अभी हम नहीं निकाल सकते। मुझे लगता है यही काफी है कि अभी AAIB की टीम अच्छा काम कर रही है। केवल 1 महीने के अंदर उन्होंने प्राथमिक रिपोर्ट यहाँ प्रस्तुत की है। पहले तो अगर ब्लैक बॉक्स भी मिलता था, एक हेलीकॉप्टर का भी एक्सीडेंट हुआ तो ब्लैक बॉक्स के लिए हम विदेश जाना पड़ता था, लेकिन अभी यहीं पे सब हो रहा है। तो अभी काम जलद गति से चल रहा है, फास्ट चल रहा है।
So you heard what the Aviation Minister and Minister of State for Civil Aviation had to say, that this is just the preliminary report. Viewers, while there are several questions which remain unanswered, the preliminary report has ruled out some of the theories which were doing the rounds earlier. What probe report rules out? Let's now tell you one by one. Fuel contamination. So this is something that has been ruled out completely. Fuel samples, according to report, were taken from, the fuel samples, in fact, that were taken were tested and found absolutely satisfactory. So there is no problem out there. The flaps misconfiguration. Now that also has been ruled out. Flap handle in 5-degree position, that is consistent with a normal takeoff kind of a situation. A bird strike has also been ruled out. No significant bird activity was observed in the vicinity of the flight path. Weight overload has also been ruled out. That was also not the reason why this crash took place. Takeoff weight was within the permissible limits. Thrust problem, that also has been ruled out. Flight data reveals thrust levers remained forward until the impact. Notably, fuel control switches, which are under the scanner, were flagged as a potential issue by the US Federation the US Aviation Federation, which is US FAA, on Boeing planes in 2018. And this is a very, very important aspect that must be highlighted. A reference to this 2018 warning that was issued by Federal Aviation Administration. 7 years ago, the FAA released Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin carrying an advisory to inspect locking feature of the fuel switch to ensure engagement. The advisory says it should be checked whether a switch can be moved without, in fact, lifting up the switch. According to the preliminary report, the recommended inspections were not performed because the bulletin was an advisory instead of this being made a mandatory feature. The FAA special bulletin was an advisory only and not mandatory, but a reference to this particular advisory, viewers, has been made in this particular prelim report by the AAIB. Now, importantly, the AAIB preliminary report has not recommended any action against these entities. Boeing in this case, viewers, is the maker of the aircraft. It was a Dreamliner aircraft. No action has been recommended. There is no recommendation for Boeing here. General Electric, it is the manufacturer of the engine here. Again, no action has been recommended for GE as well. And then if you look at the manufacturer operators of B7878 aircraft, of course, no action has been recommended out there. So, of course, there are several questions that still remain unanswered because, like I was mentioning earlier, this report has told us what led to the crash, but it has not really told us who was responsible, who was behind it. And there are some other clues as well. So let's try and decode some of those with our guests who are joining us on the broadcast this evening. We have Sanjay Lazar, who is an aviation expert and CEO, Aviation as well, and Dr. Sonia Brown, aerospace expert, also joining us from the University of New South Wales. Good evening to both of you. Thank you for joining us here on Times Now. Sanjay Lazar, I want you to tell our viewers your observations. 2-3 things that you observed that can help us get closer to get an answer to this question. What led to this particular crash? Who was responsible?
First of all, thank you for having me on your show. Having read through the AAIB report, it seems to conceal more than it shows. It's raised more questions than answers. And I'm really, with my, years of experience with aviation and watching tragedies across the world, I'd like to say that, all has not come out here. It's, there's too many gaps in what they've reported. The other thing that disturbed me was there were some US-based source leaks a couple of days ago, 3 days ago, which spoke of almost, the same context of the report, which is a worrying sign. I also believe that, it's regrettable that the entire CVR transcript was not shared in the preliminary report. Only a odd sentence, about why did you cut off? No, I didn't, has been shared. And that has led to some kind of, a gap or, misinterpretation by people. Now, it's very clear that the report says that the switches were cut off, and there was some confusion in the cockpit between these two pilots who were wondering what happened. But the other big takeaway is nobody is asking how that happened. Now you rightly pointed out the 2018 December FAA advisory, which clearly at the last paragraph states that there is a possibility of, some of these Honeywell pieces of the fuel control switch, which could have the sliding capability. It might slide back or disengage, and therefore you're required to look into it and inform Boeing. We've not been told by Boeing or the FAA or the NTSB in the last 6-7 years how many operators looked at it and how many reported this kind of snag. The second thing, I refer you to another FAA report of May 2nd, 2022, which is entitled Engine Fire Control Panel, Engine Fire Shutoff Switch. Now, this was regarding an incident that took place, and it brought about a mandatory order to check FOD risks. FOD is foreign object debris that got into the panel. And the first finding of this, and I'm making this very clear on you, I mean, I'm sure your researchers could bring this document up. It says FOD risk includes uncommanded activation of the engine fuel shutoff. This is for 787 and this is in 2022. So it's after the non-mandatory advisory. This comes in regard to the fuel, to the fire shutoff. So there is a history relating to this, which brings me to my main point. The last paragraph of this AAIB report is a very disconcerting note to me, where, you know, when the investigation is still in a preliminary stage, this is a preliminary report, yet the AAIB goes out on a limb and states that there are no findings against, you know, there's no safety recommendations against Boeing or the GE. What are these FAA statements? Why is the reference to the FAA document if there's nothing required?
I think that's a very, very important point you have raised, Mr. Sanjay Lazar, and I'd like to take that point across to Dr. Sonia Brown as well. Isn't it a valid point? Because here a reference has been made to the 2018 US FAA Bulletin, the Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, regarding problems with fuel control switch locking mechanisms on Boeing aircraft, including the Dreamliner, the model in question here. And on the last page, as Sanjay Lazar was also mentioning, it says at this stage of investigation, there are no recommended actions to Dreamliner or GE engine operators and manufacturers. Isn't it like, in a way, giving a clean chit to the manufacturer at this stage?
I think that that's actually a very important clean sheet. So I'm going to disagree a little bit here. These fuel shutoff valves, they're used by pilots all around the world daily. They're used in standard startup procedures and shutdown procedures daily. If there were regular problems with these switches, not even daily, every flight, the pilots move these switches. So if there were problems with these switches, it's very unlikely it would have only happened in the air. I think the report is clear on the likely causes of this, which is likely somebody moved those switches. Particularly, they were also moved, as noted in the report, 1 second apart. If they were suddenly knocked or something, which, as I say, there is two actions. It's a pull out before you shift it down to cutoff. If they were accidentally knocked, that would have been a much smaller time frame. So, unfortunately, I believe the report is very clear that human factors were involved here, and it is unfortunate we don't have more of the cockpit transcript to understand that more. That is very unfortunate. However, these reports are not there to assign blame overall. They're not there to assign blame. They're trying to look at the overall safety of our aviation around the world, and if they don't know, if there isn't something they consider fact, it won't go in those reports. So I suspect the rest of the cockpit voice recording probably adds more confusion, and that the one extract that is there, which is just a paraphrase, probably is the only bit that they felt was useful at this stage until that full investigation is complete, which is important, takes its course. But there is a real importance to these preliminary reports, because if there is a wide safety issue, for example, if it was detected that there was a particular issue with the Boeing aircraft, then we would need to know about this soon. We don't want to wait for a year.
Okay. I will get Mr. Sanjay Lazar to respond to the point that you're making, but I also want to remind you of what had happened with Lion Air and Ethiopian Air 737 MAX crash that took place a few years ago. At that time also, the manufacturer of the aircraft, the same manufacturer that we are talking about for AI-171 Dreamliner, Boeing, also jumped to blame the pilots. And eventually we know what really came out. So isn't it too early to really give them a clean chit? I mean, what was the need to really mention this kind of a statement? While I partially agree with you for the fact that, of course, these particular switches are being used in a certain way across the world, and why something like this has gone wrong with this particular aircraft only. But how can you then forget what happened with Lion Air, Ethiopian Air? Is it very convenient for this aircraft manufacturers to just blame the pilots who are not there to defend themselves today?
Do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, Dr. Sonia, and then Mr. Lazar.
Sure. So the Boeing 73 MAX is very much in my mind, very much in my mind. However, there was systems failures with that, and that was no one blamed the pilots or anybody in that first preliminary report. And by the time the second preliminary report came out, and I read that report in detail, it was very clear that there was a manufacturing problem. After the Lion Air crash, before the preliminary report, there was already worldwide bulletins going out with new procedures.
Okay.
So there has been system issues before. However, it's pretty clear that this is an Indian-led investigation team.
Okay, Mr. Sanjay Lazar.
I take Dr. Sonia's point on that it's a daily occurrence. You use it on every flight to start up and shut down. And if there were any issues, they would have obviously been noticed by not only by Air India but by other carriers. I absolutely take that, which brings me to my corollary, which she said, the cockpit voice recorder would have added more confusion, or if they'd let it out. Here is where I if they're trying to suggest very gently that this could have been a situation other than a technical or a mechanical. There are some sessions online, and I've heard on various other channels some ridiculous suggestions of German wing kind of situation. I believe that it should have been clear. Yes, the preliminary report is not the place to be spilling your guts on the entire report.
Right.
But I think this has added a huge dimension of confusion, and I do believe that I think there's going to be a cry out, at least in India, for a judicial inquiry, so we get all the details. We can't wait for a year.
Absolutely, we can't really wait for one full year. We need to know what really happened, because what the AAIB has mentioned in this preliminary report is just part of the, information, just one part. Say, for example, the conversation that happened between the pilots in the cockpit from the cockpit voice recorder, just one little excerpt has been put, that too has been paraphrased and has been put in this particular report, and that has further deepened the mystery. So we'll be tracking this closely ahead as well. But for now, Dr. Sonia Brown and Mr. Sanjay Lazar, appreciate you joining us with your perspective on this. We'll slip into a very, very short break. More on this on the other side.